Where do great games come from? When you sit down to play a great game, it can feel almost magical. The experience is so cohesive and so complete that it must have appeared in some kind of vision, right? Wrong. The journey to making a game is treacherous, it's arduous, and most importantly, it's different for everyone. Prolific creator of great games, Adam Saltsman, gave a really good talk recently about a game design methodology that he used in creating his games collection, CorgiSpace. The methodology goes something like this. You start with some concept that is easy but not obvious, something that you have the capability to make but that you might not think of straight away. Then you iterate on your idea until your formula starts to shine through. And once you're in a groove with your formula, then you start noticing things about this formula as hard as you can. Now, this kind of pitch for a design methodology got me really excited, and I wanted to try it out for myself to see how it would work, how it would affect my design practice. So I booted up Pico 8 for the very first time and just got cooking. Starting with the first step of the methodology, we wanted some concept, some nugget of an idea that was easy but not obvious. And the first thing that arrived to me was Connect 4, but you can drop the disks from any direction. This is easy enough to implement. It suits Pico 8 really well because it's a kind of grid-based, turn-based game, but it's not obvious because it would be physically impossible on a real-life Connect 4 board. You can't drop stuff from beneath. So after an evening in the trenches, we had something ready to go. The next morning I woke up, I solicited some of my family members to play a couple rounds with me, and it was fine. The games were pretty fun, probably not as fun as regular Connect 4, and the system we'd created had these weird janky properties that would kind of sour up the whole experience. For example, when you first drop a tile from one side to another, you can then no longer use the other side to drop tiles anymore. You completely block it off. Now, I was a little dejected that my first attempt hadn't blown my socks off, but all hope was not lost. You see, in these two-player competitive environments, you would normally end up with a big amorphous blob in the middle that wasn't very interesting. But when I was sitting alone and just fiddling with the system, I was able to create these really weird, winding shapes that I found pretty compelling. Now, our methodology tells us that we need to treat the act of noticing with absolute reverence. So was there a way for us to pull on this thread and bring these shapes to the forefront of the game somehow? To do this, we needed to employ another trick from the methodology, and that is separating the formula from the idea. Now, the formula that we had was a sort of Connect 4 variant, but maybe these shapes were the actual idea that we wanted to get at. And so why not try a different formula to try and bring this idea into more prominence? Why not try something like a puzzle game? So on evening 2, I sat down and stripped out all the two-player stuff and tried to put in the simplest puzzly things that I could think of. So we have a key that needs to be taken to a lock, and we have some walls that can block your path. During this rewrite, I also made a change to the core system that ended up being really, really important. So before, you would drop a block, it would attach to the structure, and then nothing else would happen. It would stay where it was. But now when you drop a block, it first attaches to the structure and then it moves the whole structure one block in the direction that it was falling. This change felt necessary because I'd stopped noticing things about the system. These structures looked really interesting, but they weren't really doing anything. They never surprised me. And in other words, they were never giving me anything new to notice. Now, I had a hunch that adding a bit of movement to the falling blocks would fix this, and here's why. In the original version, you would take one action and it would have one effect. You drop the block and it attaches to the structure. In the new version, you take one action and it has two effects. You drop the block, it attaches to the structure, and then it moves the structure. And this frequently leads to situations where you take an action because you want the first effect, and then you're surprised by the second effect. So, for example, let's say I have this structure and I want to move it sideways. So I'm going to drop a block in from the side and the structure moves sideways. Let's go, I get what I wanted. Except that the second effect, the fact that it attached to the structure, now prevents me from moving it up into the space that I needed it in. And so I'm surprised by the second effect that I hadn't considered. And that kind of back and forth between these two almost conflicting effects is the exact kind of source that we're looking for to generate this surprise. So now we were getting somewhere. Dropping these blocks and creating these structures and moving them around the map had become this strange alien experience with loads of quirks and little things to notice. We had arrived at the fertile shores of Puzzle Land. Now, what else is there to do in Puzzle Land but design some puzzles? And I'll have to admit, I was pretty intimidated at this point in the project because I've never really hand-authored puzzles in a puzzle game before. The closest I've come is the sort of procedural tactical puzzles in my main project, Korimeke. You can wishlist it on Steam right now. Anyway, I didn't know if I had the chops to design puzzles that would do the system justice. But at the end of the day, there's only one way to find out. So we just got started. The process of designing puzzles was a lot more exploratory than I'd been expecting. I would basically open up a blank level and just start messing around with stuff until I noticed something that I found interesting. I would note the observation down and then get to work on trying to create a situation that would funnel the player into experiencing the same observation that I had. It felt a lot less like chiseling a sculpture that you already had in mind, and a lot more like exploring a forest and then building boardwalks out to the cool waterfalls so that other people could see them too. So let's look at a quick example. While playing around with the system, I found that you could create these sort of hook shapes that would allow you to reach around the level and access areas that seemed like they were blocked off. This seemed like a pretty exciting discovery when I found it, and so I wanted to create levels that would emphasize this kind of thing. To do that, I start by tucking a lock and a key away behind this little corner here. But then players can just drop blocks from the top, and they don't create the hook, and they don't get to experience this cool observation. So we block off the top. Okay, so now players can create a hook on the wall and drop it in to push this key into the lock. And we're starting to get towards this idea, but it's not quite there. It doesn't sort of evoke this feeling of reaching out of bounds that it was what actually excited me in the first place. So let's block off that wall too. And now the player has this little area down the bottom where they can create their hook, lift it up, and reach out of bounds to push the key into the lock. And now I think the level is where we want it. Players are going to be forced to have the same revelation that I had, and that's really exciting. Something else that surprised me is that sometimes the system would tell you how to design the puzzles, but also sometimes the puzzles would tell you how to design the system. It created this kind of cycle. So, for example, I kept trying to make these puzzles that already had blocks on the map that would sort of get in your way. It seemed like it would be an interesting twist if this thing you'd been using as a tool the whole time had suddenly become an obstacle. And I just couldn't get it to work. I kept having to create these big structures of walls to keep the blocks inside, and then there was no space left for an actual puzzle on the map. It was a big mess. The system as it was now just couldn't support these kinds of puzzles. But that was all fixed with one tiny change to the system. Until now, dropping a block next to a structure would do nothing. The block just sails on past it and doesn't have any effect on the structure itself. But if we change that so that even these kind of grazing blocks stick to the structures and move them too, then everything sort of starts to click into place. We could now design puzzles with these sort of hostile blocks, but they had a much smaller footprint, which gives us the room we needed to get creative with actual puzzle designs. Surprisingly, this also gave the system some new quirks, which opened up whole new avenues of design possibilities. For example, you could now push structures along without adding blocks to the back of them. And then this rolled into a couple more puzzles. So again, it's this sort of virtuous cycle. It was really exciting. At the end of all that, we had a suite of puzzles that were all kind of interesting in their own way. We just had to tighten up the sprites a little bit, add some music, all the fun stuff, and the project was done. Now, I feel like there's so much design space left on the table with this game, with different kinds of blocks and larger levels and multiple objectives. But Pico 8 really lends itself well to smaller scoped projects, and I think that we've explored the vanilla system here pretty thoroughly in these levels. I spent 4 or 5 days making this game, and they were just delightful. And I think Adam's methodology is largely to thank for that. It has built into it this natural ebb and flow between authoring the game and then listening to the game talk back to you that makes it this really mindful and fulfilling experience. And I can't wait to bring that sort of approach forward with me into my future projects and see what kind of effect it can have there. And that's it. That is the video. If you want to play The Other Plumber, it's up for free on itch.io right now. You can just go play it. I'll put a link in the description. And if you want something a little bit beefier really soon, you can go to Steam and wishlist my main project, Korimeke. It's this kind of tactical, puzzly, roguelike game, and it generates these situations that still really, really surprise me to this day. And yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you later. Bye. Thank you.